Just a quick couple of notes, if I can have your attention again, please. This one's important because someone from the audience just handed this information up with regard to what we were just talking about, and just asked to let you all know that the Health Consumers Council of WA also has individual advocacy service, which is free. So there's another one to jot down, those of you taking notes, or to remember, the Health Consumers Council of WA with their free advocacy service as well. And the other thing I was just asked to mention, we do have our online audience watching through the camera at the back and participating. So we'd also like to encourage any of you to submit any questions. You can do that online, and we'll try to get to a couple of those questions during this session as well. Now, with two speakers, this one will be a little bit shorter, but please let me introduce them to you. Firstly, the topic for this next discussion. And look, I mentioned at the start my links with dementia. It's a subject close to my heart. And I just think it's one, every time I speak about it, I always say that apart from the fact that we have about 500,000 people in Australia living with dementia, the flow-on effects, as you people well know, of those who care for them and those who are not yet impacted but will be, because sadly with our ageing population, it's just such a growing issue. So if dementia hasn't struck your family or anyone you know yet, unfortunately, there's a very big chance that it will. So this topic is the human rights of people living with dementia, including balancing the rights of the carer and those of the person with dementia. So next to me is Jason Burton, Associate Executive Director of Dementia Training Australia. Now, by way of introduction, Jason trained as a mental health nurse. He has specialised in supporting people living with dementia and their families for over 30 years across a wide range of care settings, including hospital, primary care, community and residential. Jason worked with Alzheimer's Australia WA for 20 years and led the organisation's focus on developing innovative dementia care and practice. He currently leads a national project developing a standards framework for dementia training and is Associate Executive Director with Dementia Training Australia. Jason has academic and practical experience developing contemporary enabling environments and implementing person-centred approaches to support people living with dementia. So give Jason a clap. And Louise Forster is the CEO of Advocare. Now, as the CEO, Louise supports older West Australians with information, education and advocacy around their rights. She has more than 20 years relevant experience in the not-for-profit sector across various aged care, disability and community service organisations. In addition to holding senior executive roles, Louise is currently Vice Chair of Palmerston Association, a not-for-profit organisation providing services to people affected by alcohol and other drugs. Louise completed her MBA at UWA, is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, has a Bachelor with Honours in Anthropology from the University of London, so she's smart, and she's committed to contributing to her community and improving health outcomes for people, especially in vulnerable groups. Please give Louise a round of applause. Okay, so look, first question, and again, we're happy to take some from the floor and online, but just around this issue of the human rights of people living with dementia, what are the main issues we need to know around that subject, Jason?
Thanks, Mike. I think it's a really interesting space that's really just starting to evolve, and for anybody who's across different sectors, I always say dementia tends to be about 10 to 20 years behind the disability sector. Which really is really annoying because my wife's in the disability sector and I always come home really enthused about the latest dementia innovation, and she kind of goes, yeah, we were doing that 10 years ago. So the human rights and people living with dementia has really not been on the radar, for forever, really. It's only really, as I said, the last 10 years that it's really started to bubble to the surface as an issue. And a lot of that is on the back of people living with dementia starting to speak out. And again, we've never really had a platform for them to do that. So I think as we evolve, as we grow, as we learn to understand the lived experience of dementia in a very different way, the whole issue around the rights of people living with dementia are becoming more and more paramount in the way that we respond. And I think you've got to kind of understand the historical context of dementia to understand why we actually was in a position where, in all honesty, the rights of people living with dementia were totally diminished. The agency as a person was totally gone. Because historically, dementia has sat in a framework of dehumanising people. You know, we've often talked about dementia, and I remember as a student nurse back in the 80s, the very first book I read on dementia was called Alzheimer's: A Living Death. You know, and that was my introduction to dementia. And I think it's just been this historic context that we've created where we somehow see people who go into cognitive decline because of dementia become less human. And if they become less human, then it's okay for us to do the things that we do to them. And so there's a real historical context around the human rights of people living with dementia that needs to be addressed first and foremost before we can move forward. And as I said, we have dementia advocates, we have amazing people, and what I've learned in this space has been from those people who are, you know, saying no more. This is not acceptable to us, and this is not what we want for our future.
There's so much I want to say about all of that. I mean, one thing I will throw in is when you talk about that dehumanising of people like that, it's just so sad. We have come a long way, thankfully, but we've still got such a long way to go. And one of the main things I just want to throw in for those of you who have not experienced dementia is one of the misconceptions here is that no two cases are the same. Everyone with dementia is completely different in the way that it is displayed. And I say that coming from a place where I thought years ago that people with dementia just kind of slipped off and lost their mind and didn't really know that they did. And it was just harder on everyone else around them. And that's so often not the case either. My grandmother was patently aware that she was losing her mind, and it was driving her crazy. And that frustration and confusion of people living with dementia. And then don't get me started on the human rights and how we treat people with dementia, because that's what's got to change. Louise, in your role, what do you say about that, the human rights of people with dementia?
I think everyone has basic human rights, and there are a number of, you know, international and national rights that, you know, we can look at for reference. But I think with aged care, really going back to the Charter of Aged Care Rights is very helpful. So there are 14 rights when someone's receiving aged care. And I think understanding that people have a right, all of those rights, whether they have decision-making ability or not, or cognitive, whatever their cognitive ability is. So for me, it's very much trying to have those early conversations, potentially when someone has decision-making ability. But one of the rights I think is really important is the right to be listened to and understood. And that is whether or not someone is able to verbally talk about what they want. So, you know, the ability, you know, staff and anyone working with someone older needs to be able to, in whatever way, be able to listen to someone's needs and wants and desires and passions and understand those. So, you know, every one of us has a, you know, basic human right for that, but certainly if we're receiving aged care, we definitely have a right for that. We also have a right to have, to be able to exercise our rights. So we should be provided with a space to be able to, you know what our rights are, be heard, whether that's through words or not, and have those rights exercised. And I think it can be quite tricky with cognitive decline, because at some point someone might not be able to make decisions successfully for themselves, but based on that, which can come into play with who is that person that makes decisions. So when might enduring power be invoked, and who might be making those decisions, and is that person a trusted person? Do they have the person's best interests at heart? And did they have conversations when the decision-making ability was there, so that the person making decisions on someone else's behalf can confidently say, this is what I believe that they would have wanted?
Yes, getting back to that point of every case, every person being different, there's also that whole scale. So you're all aware, I mean, effectively, dementia is the umbrella term for the collection of symptoms, and Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, but there are others, and it starts with what they call mild cognitive impairment and will then usually progress. Now, part of that, and then when it progresses, some people might be incredibly placid, others might be incredibly violent, and everywhere in between. I just wonder if we can touch on then from the carer's perspective, where those human rights of the person living with dementia might be in somehow in conflict with the carer. Everyone has their own rights in this whole story, don't they?
They do, and that's part of the really big challenge, and why there is no black and white in it. You know, it's an incredible ethical minefield, really, when you get into it. Let me give you an example. So people living with dementia are probably the only group in this country that can be incarcerated for the rest of their life against their will without any real legal protections around them. So if I'm looking after my wife, who has dementia, and I decide I can't cope anymore, I can have her placed in a secure unit for the rest of her life. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, because I've been a carer. I cared for my grandma who had Lewy body dementia. I was her main carer. I had to make that really difficult decision to place her in residential care. Broke my heart, broke her heart. So I understand why it happens. But from a purely human rights point of view, isn't it interesting that people living with dementia are the only group that we do that to? Literally everything else has a really strong legal framework around it before you would incarcerate somebody for the rest of their life. So that in itself, I think, is just a really extreme example. And then it comes down to just everyday things. I've just spent 18 months working with families and staff in residential care. And the day-to-day things, Louise talked about a lot of the charters and a lot of the structures and frameworks that we've got that protect people's rights. But it's that day-to-day in the moment. That's when people's rights get eroded. When we make a decision without asking the person, when we think this is what the person really wants. Or sometimes when we actually acquiesce to family pressure when it's not in the best interest of the person with dementia. And I saw that a lot. So this is where you can sometimes get the conflict between what the carer wants, what the carer feels is the best thing, and what the person living with dementia wants. And I think it's really interesting because when I placed my grandma in care, it was one of those moments, because I was already 7 years into my dementia professional career, so I kind of had a lot of background to it. And I suddenly had this moment where I thought, what's important the most to the family and myself is that my grandma's safe. However, what's most important to her is that she still keeps her autonomy. And that's where the conflict comes from. As family, as carers, we want what's best. We want to keep the person safe. But for you, if you actually said what's most important to you, it's often that we want to keep our autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. What more can families do, Louise, apart from being on the same page? I think that's where you were getting at too, weren't you, Jason? I mean, it's not all families are all on the same page with the rights and the wants and the needs of the person living with dementia.
I think probably the most important conversation that families can have is about the future. So one sure thing is we're all going to die. And I think most of us would hope we live into old age. So we should be having the conversations about what that looks like. It's really hard to know what someone's wishes are if we haven't had the conversation. But as a society, we do avoid the conversation, and we really shouldn't, because it's an inevitability. So really, we need to know what people, said, likes, dislikes, triggers, passions. We need to be able to put ourselves in someone's shoes and make those decisions. And as individuals, I think we need to, test out the people we trust with our potential decision-making. One thing from Advocare's perspective, we generally support the individual themselves when if they have decision-making capacity. And we also work in the space of elder abuse, which is when someone in a trusted relationship takes action that causes harm or distress. So not a worker in a service. And the complexity around that area is it's someone that's known to the individual, and say another example like Jason used is an adult daughter of an older mother might have different opinions about what's safe for mum to do, but mum has a dignity of risk to choose to do things that the daughter might not choose. So really understanding who is able to make the decision. If the older person is able to make the decision, then they need to have the dignity to make that decision. And then if they're not able to make a decision for whatever reason, someone else needs to be able to kind of put themselves in their shoes and kind of go, actually, I think mum would have wanted to do this, whether there's risk involved or not, which is similar to what Jason was saying.
And even just in the way we treat the person living with dementia, though, just talk to us quickly about that. You've got that lived experience as well. But, the worst thing you can do is treat someone like they're an idiot.
Yeah, I think there's two parts really. One, we've really medicalised dementia as an experience, and we've pathologised the lived experience of dementia. And by that I mean, if I don't have dementia and I get angry for a good reason, then people would say, I understand why he's got angry. If I do have dementia and I get angry for good reason, people will label me as having BPSD, which stands for Behavioural and Psychological Symptoms of Dementia. And it's rubbish. It's nonsense. Most of what we call behaviour is just people expressing themselves in the same way as if you don't have dementia. Now, there's all sorts of other things that are tied in with that if you do have cognitive impairment. But first and foremost, 90% of what I see is people just expressing themselves and often expressing distress. And we've become really bad at recognising that, and we've pathologised it, and we've medicalised it, and we've made it a profession, and I sit here as part of that. But in reality, it's often just people's reaction to the world around them, how people are treating them, the fact that they feel dismembered and excluded from community and society and family, the fact they're in a locked environment. Hands up here who would get angry if I took you now out of here and put you in a room with 20 people and locked you up. It's natural to get angry in that situation, and yet if you had dementia and got angry in that situation, you'd be labelled as having BPSD, and that would ultimately often lead you down a road to medication, antipsychotic use, which is terrible drugs, never designed for purpose, totally ineffective, and actually just makes people's lives much worse.
Yeah, well said. The one word that I often use when people wonder what it's like for the person living with dementia, the one word that I often use that isn't always used is confusion, the confused, that the person, that's what I learnt from my grandmother's experience. And I've spoken about it a bit, and it helped when I've relayed this story where when she was in the earlier stages, I sat her down when she couldn't find the words and couldn't quite string the sentence together. And I said, Nan, just stop and tell me, what's going on in your mind right now? And she stopped and she just said, everything's just jumbled up. And it was such a fascinating insight into that everything in her mind is just jumbled up, that she's just confused and it's not forming, the words to form the sentences are not coming out. I just think I threw that in because I just think it's helpful to remember that that's what the person living with dementia is going through. That internal battle is so full on, isn't it?
It is. And I often, when I train with staff, and families now, I often say to them, consider it how, if the world around you makes no sense at all, what would you do? You can either live in a very distressed state in a world that makes no sense, or you can start to create a world that makes sense. And often in my experience of walking alongside people living with dementia is that's what happens. They create a world that pulls on all the cues around them, and then whatever long-term memory still exists, and then they create a world that makes sense to them so that they're not in this constant state of anxiety and distress. The trick for us as family and as staff is to learn to step into that world with them. Because, that's 101 dementia care. If you can step into people's world and try and understand the world that they've created and how you can support that world. And I trained at a time when that was heresy. Okay, so back in the day, I used to run community groups for people living with dementia who are still at home. And I used to do this really horrible thing, and I look back on it now with great embarrassment and shame, what we used to call reality orientation. And I used to sit this group of people together who had these cognitive problems, and I'd say to them, what day is it today? And what month is it? And who's the Prime Minister? And you know what? It didn't matter, and they didn't know, and they felt really embarrassed because they didn't know. But at the time, we thought trying to drag people back into our world was the right thing to do. But now we know that it's much better to step into their world and support them where they are.
Yes, so well said, so well said. Has anyone got any questions along these lines? Yes.
What's happening with the healthcare system in educating them with regards to human rights with people with dementia? Because as a nurse, I've seen a lot of abuse in the healthcare systems with people, elderly people with dementia, and firsthand my mother had dementia, who's just passed away in June, who got put on a Form 1A and was restrained on a trolley, sent to a mental health institute just because she was acting a little bit aggressive. Mm-hmm. And she was 91. Yeah. So, and she stayed there for 2 weeks until she got told she could go back out into society, that she wasn't in danger. Yeah. So what's happening with healthcare with regards to educating people that look after our vulnerable people with dementia?
More training needed still.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, this movement's really probably started in the late 1980s, in this movement away from this medicalisation of dementia to looking at the human side of it. So we're 30 years plus into it now. We're still so far from where we need to be. Why is that? Because dementia doesn't sit in an undergraduate programme of most health professionals. So you can do your RN training and have very little experience or training in dementia, which is just crazy given that, we know the percentage rates that you're going to come in contact with as an RN. So it's got to start at that undergraduate level. And then there's got to be opportunity for people to learn and keep learning. That's part of the work that I'm doing for the government at the moment around the Dementia Standards Framework, where we're actually creating a framework for people's learning journeys around dementia. So if you want to go on this journey, at the moment, part of the problem is it's not, there's no minimum qualification standard or expectation. So even as a support worker or care worker, you could go work with people with dementia and never had any training in it, which is crazy. This government's looking at that and the minimum standards for support workers, thankfully, so hopefully we'll get there with that one. But there's lots of training out there. Is it the right type of training? That's a good question. And now in my new role with Dementia Training Australia, one that I can start to influence, hopefully, because we do a lot of training on knowledge, very little on skills and empathy.
Do you know the other thing that it's just good to remember that it's only about 40 years ago that dementia wasn't even able to be diagnosed until after someone had died and they studied the brain. Now we can diagnose it. That's only been in the last 30 or 40 years, right? That you can diagnose it. You can do brain scans. You can do all sorts of tests now, which leads me into that conversation of treatments, cures. I honestly opened the newspaper this morning and there was another headline that said Alzheimer's breakthrough. There's one just about every day in the paper. If we believed all of it, it wouldn't be a problem. But where are we at? Because it's not that horrible book title death sentence that it might have once been.
It's not, although there's still a long way to go even in that, and GPs diagnosing the support pathways that are offered to families and the person at diagnosis are still desperately lacking. So we've still got a long way to go even in that. I think, if I had $1 for every time I'd heard that we were on a breakthrough in the last 30 years, I'd be retired by now. If we were mice, I think we'd have cured everything by now. Unfortunately, there's a real complexity of it because, like you said, dementia is an umbrella term. So we're talking over 100 different neurological conditions. So there will never be one cure for dementia. Hopefully, we'll find cures for the neurological conditions. How close are we? I go from optimistic to totally pessimistic because I've seen so much over the years. I think we just keep learning and building on learning. So at one point we had a theory around amyloid and proteins in the brain and things, and we kind of realised that that's too simplistic and it's probably far more complex than that, and a variety of things. The good news is the incidence rate of dementia is going down. The bad news is prevalence is going up. Okay, the incidence is coming down, so that's the number of people per 100. Because we're living healthier lifestyles, which might seem strange given that there's a McDonald's on every street corner. But people are not smoking, people are less drinking, people are exercising more. So our incidence rates are actually coming down. The problem is, like you said, we have an ageing community, and therefore the prevalence, the total number of people, is still massively going up. So whilst we're a long way from treatment, what I would just like to finish on before I hand over to Louise is that for people living with it now, that's where our focus needs to stay. We've got great support groups. We have Alzheimer's WA, and there's Warren and Ella from Alzheimer's WA here. So if you haven't connected with Alzheimer's WA yet, they're our state-based dementia organisation. Please speak to them in the breaks because they're a great organisation to support you. We have a national organisation in Dementia Australia that has a 24-hour helpline. We have programmes to support around if your person is in distress. We've got a lot of supports there, but people just don't know about them. So please do research and find out what's available.
Thank you. It's like the whole carers conversation more broadly, isn't it? You've just got to know. You've got to be pointed in the right direction. This is Warren from Alzheimer's WA.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Professor Warren Harding, Chair of Alzheimer's WA, and Ella Dax as our CEO. Thank you for the introduction there, Jason. I think it's been a really useful conversation around the human rights as it relates to guardianship and also the choice of care and who provides you that care. But at Alzheimer's WA, we also have a view that everybody has a human right to age with dignity and live in their community. So age well in your community, and I think that's really important, that where your children go to work and your grandchildren go to school. We've got a lot of work to do with local governments and state governments to make sure we've got dementia-enabling environments, dementia-friendly communities. Carers need access to respite services, memory cafes. I wonder if you'd like to give a comment on where that breakthrough is going to occur, because I think that's where the human right occurs, to age well in place.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. I think it's a movement like anything, and it takes time. And we started that movement probably 10, 15 years ago, Alzheimer's WA, and our state has been recognised around the world as a leading place for this movement around helping people to stay home, get the supports they need. I think part of the shift as well is changing demographics. So we had people who developed dementia in the past who were a pretty passive group from that generation. And now the people developing dementia in this next generation are much less passive and are much less willing just to accept anything that's given to them. So I think people are actually starting to stand up and say, do you know what? I want a better alternative than that locked dementia unit. Why can't I stay at home? Why can't I go to my local shops and have the shopkeeper actually support me because he knows I've got cognitive decline? Why can't I walk into my local library and the carpet be appropriate so it doesn't make me fall over because it's all patterned? People with dementia will drive that and will continue to drive that. And that's the exciting thing. When I think back in my career, people often say to me, what's the biggest change you've seen? I'd have to say it's that. People living with dementia advocating and starting to push back, and family carers coming on that journey with them and say, do you know what? 150-place residential care institution that looks really nice, like a 4-star resort, but with no choice in it. Is that really what I want for me, my loved one? No. So I think it needs to come from the groundswell. I think providers need to get innovative and stop being so conservative and actually offer different choices. At the moment, we don't have different choices. It's pretty much community care, if you can get it, when you can get it, until you can't cope, and then you go into a big institution. And that's pretty much what we've got still. That's what we had 100 years ago. We've got to get better.
There's one other thing you can do. If you've got someone in your family living with dementia or you're caring for someone with dementia, another little program that I had a bit to do with was run by WA Police called Safe and Found. Who else, every time you see someone of a certain age that they've gone missing and it's on the news and I just think, I bet they've got dementia, or that poor family. There's a program, if you want to Google it, safeandfound.org, I think it is, and you can register your loved one. And it's not just dementia, but anyone who might, autism or anything where they might have a propensity to wander, and there's a database and they can be on there and it will help that if they go missing, the police can help find them and bring them home. I just thought I'd throw that in while I thought of it. Louise, have you got anything else you want to add in closing?
I agree with Jason around we need to change the model of aged care, definitely, and age-friendly communities is a way to go, definitely. It's pretty archaic having the facilities that we have, and it won't meet the needs of our ageing population either. I definitely support the conversation earlier about the circles, and I think the community is where the power is. And just comment on Department of Communities, which is a state-based department, are doing their senior strategy at the moment. And that's very much, Minister Punch is looking at that across all parts of society, because rather than having a strategy for older people, older people are just part of the population. So we need to look at roads and housing and all the things that happen in life and making sure they're suitable as we age, because we're going to be a very ageing population in the next few decades.
All right, thank you both. We are going to have to break for our little lunch break now. Please thank Louise Forster and Jason Burton for their time and insights.